fortunately, I'll be able to be here with you today and tomorrow in this important initiative from Roads to Justice. And at CAJAR, we're very happy to have joined this initiative. Regarding this first legal workshop that we had, one of the most complex situations that we have had to face on our path to this territorial defense is that there are certain processes that only occasionally do we really look inside ourselves. And it turns out that there are times when the sharing of experiences, when knowing about the multiple pathways that have been walked on by different processes, turn out to be fundamental. In this world, from the legal view, which is what we're tackling here, law, standards, norms, legislation are still a tool for domination. And from that basis, it is hard to analyze all these ideas regarding municipal agreements and mining production. In this country, we cannot see anything that refers to banning mining activities. There's a lot of challenges there. So we say, okay, let's go for the municipal agreement for protecting water sources. And then by doing that, we sort of try to find tools. Now, CAJAR, or José Alvear Restrepo, said that in relation to this legislation and norms, they had to come from the people to the people, bottom up, instead of from the top to the bottom, as it's been the case so far. And if that is not achieved, we're going to find many difficulties. Now, in spite of the recommendations that we see in this very good timeline, which is fundamental for all processes, besides the maps of actors and identification of actions, I urge you to evaluate as we go the bills that are being promoted from the grassroots, from the basis. Bills like environmental democracy, and a bill will be implemented regarding businesses and human rights, or at least something that will allow the discussion of this situation starting from the basis. But I said that it's important to not only look inside ourselves, because sharing these experiences and evaluating pathways is what can actually make us stronger and make the different networks get together. So I'll be accompanying you here in this panel that is just beginning to hear from what this session will be all about, which is named corporate capture. What is corporate capture? What are the means through which this is evident? And more specifically, what challenges, what difficulties have to be surmounted? How do we look at this world? How do we evaluate it, this world of corporate capture, vis-a-vis the territorial fights and struggles that are present in our territory? So, Francisco, the floor is yours.
Corto, entonces, básicamente.
I'll say that, well, basically, this is what we want to explain. We have this experience, and our sister Ludivia will talk to us about movement of victims of multinationals. 10 years ago, we created this organization, but actually we've been working for 30 years, vis-a-vis these multinationals. We're hearing great news. After 17 years, Chiquita has been found guilty by the 11,127 homicides that it committed and the million of displaced people. This is a step forward after 17 years of work, and as you know, well, this is a lot of hard work. what we want to show here is how this co-opting on the part of the state happens by the multinationals, even though we want to clarify something. We don't believe that multinationals co-opt the state. Actually, we believe, and this has been evidenced, we could do it over a cup of coffee later to show that philosophically and historically, the state is only an instrument used by the companies and the groups that are in power. There is no co-opting there. That's what they are made for. In the case of Colombia, we would like to show you how the state has had instruments in order to allow companies to do what they're doing. So, since the information is quite a lot, and while we try to put up my presentation here on the screen, meanwhile, I'll be telling you about how the imposition of these mining model, thanks to this co-opted state, let's call it that way, this has had 3 levels of implementation throughout the last 40 years. The first level of implementation is the imposition of a model through agreements with multilateral banks. The second one is the creation by the multinational companies and their lawyers and basically the Canadian embassy, as well as the embassy of the United States and the embassies of the European Union. And here, this is a bracket. This country is so democratic that embassies write Colombian legislation. That's how democratic we are. And then the third one is the mining model being imposed based on violence. This is summarized in 2 conferences for which I will share the link with you on YouTube. One regarding the role of multinationals in violence in Colombia, and the other one, okay, here we have it at last, it's on the screen, and the other one is how this all comes about. So, okay, let's look at the next one. So what's the first level of co-opting? Even though I don't really agree with this sentence. Well, the agreement between Colombia and the International Monetary Fund and the binding agreements between Colombia and the World Bank, the free trade agreements and the agreements with the World Trade Organization. The first thing that they impose are changes throughout the legal structure and the administrative structure of the Colombian state in order to make it easier for multinationals in these sectors, that is to say telecommunications, oil mining, electricity, finance, and the environment, will follow the instructions behind the imposition of the mining model. The next one, please. Next one.
So this is the text of the agreement between the World Bank and the Colombian government. It reads that from July to December 1999, the government is submitting proposals to reform the pension plan. So pension plan that will allow or will enable that the companies that in addition to the money that they will have money from Colombians to do the stupidities they carry out. And the other one is the Congress will conduct a reform, a tax reform, and they've done 4. And so the Canadian government has been hired to change the tax reform in every Colombian, what has happened in Argentina, Nigeria, Chile, in Congo. And because Canadians have a lot of experience in changing their legislation to fine-tune it to the needs of their companies. Then the Colombian state, they're talking about privatization. So they start to privatizing all companies to give them to multinational companies, and then the health system is in the hands of them, the communication systems as well, even transport. Everything will be in the hands of public. And this is an agreement with the IMF and the World Bank. So they close Banco Agrario, Carbocol. They expand in private sector the infrastructure. So Luis Carlos Sarmiento Angulo, our good dear friend, he establishes a toll. So from our own money, the money from our pension, he takes from there and he makes roads, and maybe when he dies he will take all that money with him. In terms of foreign investment, they have a specific law in place which guarantees or provides its legal stability. That's the law. It's called the law for legal stability. I recommend that you watch the videos that I will give you the links, because going into in details would be so long. But there are two judges, the decent judges. They think that that law for legal framework, and one of them compares this to the book of La Voragine, the caucho or the rubber um, workers. And now another one, the flexibilization of the labor market, goes hand in hand with taking away the rights of workers. During Uribe and prior to President Uribe, 79% of union leaders that were killed around the world were Colombians. 79%. I come from the union movement, and we were 0.0002% of unions around the world, and 79% of us were dead, were the ones that were killed. So that was an imposition through this flexibilization, but also with the hand in hand with the genocide of union leaders. And of course, that had an impact in peasant communities, Afro communities, and indigenous communities that were involved in different unions. Free trade agreements between Colombia and Canada. To summarize this, the Canadian government tells the Colombian state that they need to restrict state companies. They need to make them smaller, and they need to be privatized. And they go into the CIADI only now with this government. La CIADI, what we call CIADI, it's an arbitration tribunal outside the Colombian legislation. So you have an idea, 95% of cases that are filed against developed countries are lost by the Colombian state. So it's great to have one of those tribunals. So Colombia has to go to the CIADI. So that's why most of the lawsuits, I think it's 74% of lawsuits filed by Colombia to Canadian companies, more of them with a seat in Canada, although they are multinational companies. So the state always loses. So the next step is the creation of the Colombian legislation. Who do they hire to draft the Colombian legislation? So the Canadian agency, through an NGO called a Canadian Energy Institute, they prepare the mining code, the oil code, environmental legislation, and 4 tax reforms. Then the lawyers, Martinez, Cordobas. Martinez is a family who are lawyers of oil companies, and Cordova, they're a family of lawyers of mining companies. So these two families, they sit down and they draft the code that we need. They're not idiots. So when people tell you that the problem with law, you need to respect the law. Why do I need to respect the law made by organized, which has been issued by organized crime and to satisfy their own interests? And the third actor or player is para-politicians. Now, when we talked about Chiquita brand and the ruling that was issued, we've been investigating for 30 years the creation of the block north of the self-defense team. I think the cost of that was 400 US dollars. And most of that money was given by the oil companies and mining companies, also some corrupt governors or government officials and other corrupt officials. And so that guaranteed two things. One, that mining and oil companies and the agro industry, they had their own security forces, and they would not be the work would not be interrupted with marches, with strikes, and they also elected congressmen throughout the country. Paramilitaries would say that 35% of congressmen were there. No, 84% of congressmen were supported the paramilitaries. Look and analyze the laws that were created to loot the country, and 84% of those congressmen were paid by multinationals that created paramilitaries, and then they made people elect those congressmen or congresswomen, and they have had reductions in taxes of an incredible amounts. Today, multinational companies, through those four tax reforms with the Canadian government, for every $100 that he pays in taxes, he receives 300 a reduction of 300 dollars in tax reduction. So I pay 100 and I take 300, and I take away everything that I produce, nickel, copper, everything. This is the agreement. So the Canadian government pays $11.3 billion to the Colombian government to change the environmental legislation on hydrocarbons and mining. These are the senators. Many of you know who they are. Miguel de la Espriella, Leonora Pineda, all those parapoliticians, they have all been condemned. She's going to talk. I'm about to finish, yes. So this is the rest. These are the lawyers, and this is international cooperation. So this is what I wanted to talk to you about. Really, I urge you to watch the videos. I will give you the links, and they go into detail, and I'll give the floor now to my sister, Lubinia.
Bueno, mi nombre
My
para
name
todos y todas es Ludivia Giraldo.
is Ludivia Giraldo.
Hice parte de
I I have worked for many human rights organizations, and I have accompanied together with the Sintra Minet Coal Union, and I worked with communities affected by mining exploitation and by multinational companies in many regions around the country. Among them, CAJAR, the south of Bolivar, of the Department of Bolivar, the Department of Guajira, also Norte de Santander and Santander. Since I don't have a lot of time, I want to share with you our experience, which is maybe an alternative that communities may have. We who work to defend our territories, we know we need to carry out some activities. We need to come together. Our colleague from CAJAR said we need to share those experiences, and we need to come together and learn about all the elements, and we need to know what we can do together, because isolated we can't do anything. And that's how the national victims movement from multinational and transnational companies, that was how it came about. Also for Afro communities, indigenous workers, and the community at large who has been affected by the doings of these companies. We met in Valledupar in 24 August 2013, and we decided it's the national movement from victims of multinational and transnational companies. There we had also the attendance of the Wayuu community, the south of Bolivar, the Uso from Santander. We wanted to know exactly what we could do. The Afro communities were also there, and also we had the participation from communities of Casanare, Arauca, and Santander, and El Cesar, of course.
Bueno, entonces, ¿y por qué nos sentamos a analizar
Why
todas estas
did we
situaciones?
sit down and try to
Hoy
analyze all situations? When I was listening yesterday and today also
las exposiciones,
to the different speakers and the presentations of the group, we have so much common ground, common stories with the agency of these multinational companies, and the victims are peasant communities, indigenous and Afro communities, the workers themselves as well, because these multinational companies are a huge power in the regions. And mainly, what we analyzed, as Pacho stated, they take power and they settle in regions that are very rich in mining and electricity, where they can find gold, gas, oil, copper, and the strategies are the one, you know about the strategies that they use, and these companies also finance. They not only seek the security from the state, but they want to have private security forces, and that's where they have an alliance with all illegal paramilitary groups. And they use these groups to carry out those terror campaigns against communities, to really take control of the territory little by little, and to expand the exploitation of their wells or mines or pits. I remember that the day we created this association, a member from the Chamber of Commerce of El Cesar, he said that 70% of the Cesar territory was being exploited and was they were expanding those mining titles, and the El Cesar department would be just full of holes everywhere on the ground. So these groups, together with the direct participation of those multinational companies, because the entrepreneurs told them who they needed to kill, social leaders, union people. Some of them were, when they came down from the buses, they would be killed. The company buses, for example, this is the case of Drummond. So while we were conducting this work, we as a movement, we carried out a project, or we devised a project along the mining corridor, Jaraguá, Chiriguaná, San Diego, Codazzi, Becerril, Chiriguaná, and some municipalities around that area, and also Valledupar, where a lot of displaced population goes. And we found that the amount of victims along these corridors from all these companies, most cases that related to violations to human rights, was related to killings, forced displacement. They did away with boards in the communities, and they would tell the family or the man, you need to sign here. please wrap up.
porque ellos decían que si no,
They told them
ellos
that
iban
if they didn't
para
sign
venderles por lo que
and they wouldn't
les
sell their
pagaban
property,
allá, tenían que vender,
they
tenían
would
que
have
negociar
to
con la
negotiate
viuda. Así
with
que
the
ellos se
widow.
apoderaban de muchas
That's
cosas.
how they took control of a lot of these
El
lands.
CESAR es uno de los
So
departamentos
the
más grandes,
CESAR
hay
is
una
one
parte
department.
de personas
We
desaparecidas
have
que
so
están
many
que
people who
nunca
have
volvieron a saber
disappeared.
nada de
We
ellos.
don't know anything
Entre
about
las
them.
afectaciones más
And
graves que
amongst the
nosotros
most
encontramos en el
serious
desarrollo
impacts or
de grupos de
harms
acompañamiento
that we found
jurídico,
in a
social,
psychosocial and
encontramos
judicial project or
pues las
process,
grandes afectaciones son a la vida,
there is
a la
loss of
integridad,
life,
al
the
trabajo,
integrity of people,
a los derechos laborales,
the right to labor,
daños
well,
ambientales, como
the
ustedes
harm
lo
to labor rights,
escuchan,
environmental damage, as you have
y
also
también
stated, and also
como digamos, la inoperancia del Estado, porque
the
está totalmente, pues,
the inability of the state
las
to
multinacionales.
operate
Y un
because
contraste que
it's
encontramos
paid by
enormemente
multinationals, and
fue
we
esta
found
enorme
that
riqueza de la
that
población
huge we
comparada
found that
con
richness
la
of the
mayoría de otras
population,
poblaciones que
and
ni
most of
siquiera
these
agua potable.
populations, they don't even have drinking water. They don't have an aqueduct.
Es así. Bueno, y ahí está entonces también la creación del frente,
So we created
pues
a
básicamente para
specific
hacer esa
front
zona,
to
Juan Andrés Álvarez,
the Juan Andres
que era
Alvarez
militar.
front. That was a
Quisiera
paramilitary front. I
solamente
would like just to
como unas preguntas
uh,
de pronto una reflexión.
maybe talk about
Hacer
some
todo este
reflection.
trabajo
Conducting all
llevó
this work
varios años, nos ha
has
también
taken many, many years.
confrontado
It
con
has confronted us also
la necesidad
with
de
the
buscar
need
esa información,
of
pero
finding that
también con
information,
las
but also
limitaciones
with the
que las
limitations it
organizaciones y los
entails,
movimientos
that
de las comunidades, las
because
organizaciones de derechos humanos
human
no
rights
hemos podido
and
realizar ese trabajo.
organizations, we
No
have a
es
lot of
fácil
limitations
conseguir
to
esa
find
información
that
y no es fácil
information,
realizar
and it's
ese
not
trabajo.
easy to conduct that
No hay
work
recursos
because
para
there are no
realizarlo. Esa
funds
es una
to
gran
conduct
limitación.
that, so
Y
that's
la
a great
otra
limitation.
es
And another limitation
que ni siquiera las
is
víctimas
that not
tienen
even the
derecho
victims have the
algo
right
fundamental,
to
a la
something which is
información
vital,
de los
which is
casos de
information
violaciones
on
de derechos humanos.
cases of violations to human rights.
Estas grandes
So
limitaciones
that's a huge limitation.
de encontrarnos porque la
And
gente está dispuesta
people,
quiere conocer por qué
they're willing
ocurrieron
to
esos
know and they
hechos.
want to
O
understand
sea,
who is behind
y
those
para eso se necesita uno conocer ese
events. So we
contexto
need to learn about the
realmente
context,
con toda
and we also need to have all the
cuál es
information,
el camino
uh,
para ellos
which
obtener
is really the path for them
justicia,
to
para que
be able to
ahora se
find
conozca
justice,
por qué
to
realmente
learn the truth
han agenciado toda esta violencia
why the
en la
state has
región y
agencies
también
all this
pues
violence
para
against the region,
que permitan que las
and
organizaciones
also
puedan
to enable
desarrollarse
organizations, the community to be
con
developed
todas sus
and to
actividades
continue with all
digamos,
its
y que no
activities.
pueda y que estos hechos no se vuelvan a repetir.
And we don't want
Bueno,
repetition of
yo
these events. Sorry, Luby, but we need to continue.